Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Double Down, the live online news and affairs programme that puts people first. It's Thursday, the 27th of May 2021. We're broadcasting live from Dundalk, Dublin, and Longford, and we are your hosts, Finbar Markey and Anna Kavanagh. It's the final week in May 2021. It's hard to believe that 6 months have already passed in the year. Hopefully, the coming 6 months will bring some progressive change and some positive news all around. You may notice that I'm not in my usual studio tonight. I'm in a different area. I just had some issues with location, but we will be back in the studio next week. It was some technical difficulties that we were having. But we will have a packed show, no less, this evening. We're not going to open up with the news that you won't see on TV that we do normally every week. But I do want to draw our viewers' attention to three stories that do stand out this week, and that I'd like you to maybe investigate yourself a little bit more, so that we can't be accused of being into controversies and things like that and conspiracy theories. We have a busy lineup, as I say. We're going to Anna Kavanagh is speaking to a man called Pat Geoghegan that she's spoken to before on the show, or on her own show, Centre Ground. And Pat is a part of the Cappagh Farmers Group. And they are very concerned about a Russian-owned company and factory in and around the Shannon Estuary that is causing what they claim is quite a lot of pollution and poison to their health and the environment in that local area. So Pat's going to give us some updates on what's happening there. I'm going to be speaking to Antoinette Keegan from the Stardust disaster campaign. Antoinette is a survivor, though she lost quite a few members of her family, and her family have campaigned for 40 years for an inquest into the disaster. There's some positive news for once. For once, the inquest is happening, and what they were most recently campaigning about, getting their legal fees paid at the inquest for the families, they've actually got that in the last week, and that was announced in the Dáil in the last week. And so Antoinette's coming on just to have a chat to us and to update us, because she's a regular guest on the show, and she wanted to come on tonight to give some positive news for once. And of course, Anna Kavanagh is going to give us her usual news and views that she does give us at the end of every show. The big thing in the news this week, and it really stands out for me, was the bringing down, not by missile but by order, in Belarus of a Ryanair airplane, and the hullabaloo right across the EU, right across the United States, in relation to the arrest and potential prosecution of what we have been told so far was a young male reporter called Roman Protasevich. And we've been told that this is an angelic reporter come activist, this Protasevich fella, and that he's been trying to campaign for democracy in Belarus against the Belarusian government, and that he's all innocent and apple pie. But it would transpire that when you scrape the surface, that may not be the case. Some photographs emerged claiming to be of this Roman Protasevich over the last 24 to 48 hours, really, emerged from Eastern Europe. And it shows that he appears, from the photographs, to be a member of a far-right. Now, when I say far right, I mean a far-right grouping over in Belarus. This guy is originally from Poland, apparently, but he's a part of a literally quite a Nazi group that has called for the paramilitary overthrow of the Belarusian government. And this is the so-called hero that we are being presented over in the West with, as some kind of a hero that wants to bring freedom and democracy to Belarus. We have those images there. I don't know if you can make those images any bigger, Stephen, can you? So there's a Roman Protasevich on I think it's him on the left, giving Nazi salutes to at a function that he was at. And there's another image here, because it's also being reported through some investigative journalist networks that Protasevich has also been involved in a voluntary paramilitary group that was operating in the Donbass region against so in Donbass and eastern Ukraine, there was a plebiscite held there. People voted to stay within the Russian sphere as opposed to the Ukrainian sphere. Democratically decided this. So the Ukrainians, and remember, there was a type of uprising or a revolution that was inspired by US dollars and that again empowered neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine to foment an uprising a number of years ago. And this is a picture of Protasevich apparently in Ukraine, dressed up, committing paramilitary activities against the people of Donbass in the Russian region of what is called is essentially eastern Ukraine. So this guy is not all innocence and light as has been presented to us, and it's once again a show of the lack of quality in journalism, in the mainstream media, and the politicization of the mainstream media in Ireland, throughout the EU and the United States. That this story has been presented that this guy is an angel bringing freedom, when in fact he's far from that, when you only scratch the surface to look behind who this guy is. And it's an attempt ultimately to destabilize Russia and to create a war footing. And that's to benefit the developing military industrial complex in the EU. This attempt to create a massive military economy, an industry within the EU, and to create that industry we have to stoke and foment war. And that is what I put to our viewers tonight is happening with this story and so many other anti-Russian stories, or stories that are built up around Russian allies. And I think it's important that we always see, is there another side to this? We can see that it's been done on Russia by Western interests over the last 10 to 15 years, but it's really hyping up. Now, we're not saying that Russia is an ideal country and a liberal country. We're not saying that Belarus is either. But there are different ways to bring about democracy. But fomenting war to build a military industrial complex in the EU is not the way to go. So I'm asking you, the viewer, don't take my word for it. Do some research on this and be surprised, but share what you find. Don't keep it to yourself, and don't have a fear of public opinion, that when you do discover things are not to what we're being told, that you have a fear of letting other people know that, because that's what's happening at the moment. Another story that stands out to me this week and has gone right under the radar is in relation to Israel, and in relation to what are acts of genocide committed by Israel, but not against the Palestinian people. Israel has attracted over 130,000 Ethiopian Jews to Israel over the last decade or so, maybe even 2 decades. And Haaretz, the very respected Israeli newspaper, has reported that after an investigation, they found that the Israeli government were forcibly sterilizing all of the female Ethiopians that came into the country as immigrants, invited immigrants to carry out work and tasks. And possibly, the statistics show that this immigrant group is the poorest in Israel. So what are they really? Are they imported slaves that are being sterilized so that they don't have any children and claim any rights to living in Israel, although they've been invited on the basis that they are Jewish? It's quite interesting. So it's a story that I think you should look into yourself, because it's quite controversial, because we know that the Jewish people themselves in Germany went through a process of forced sterilization. And it would appear from the Haaretz newspaper that many, if not most, of these women did not know that they were being sterilized when it was happening. They thought it was a part of the process of coming into Israel. So that's an interesting story from Haaretz that I'd advise you to look up yourself, just to make sure that we're not trying to con you in any way. The final story that I'd like to draw your attention to, we have covered in the past our MEP, Mick Wallace, giving speeches in relation to Syria, and also Claire Daly. And one of their main issues current issues with regards to Syria, has been the accusations made against the Syrian government that they used chemical weapons in places like Dumas and against their own people. And it was found in an investigation by the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons that the initial investigation, well, the actual investigation found that there was no chemical weapons attack, and that it was actually fake news, and it was a created scenario. When that investigation, that report was sent up to higher officials, the outcome of that was changed significantly. And Mick Wallace has spoken on this in the EU Parliament. Claire Daly, the MEP, has spoken of this in the EU Parliament. Here we have a video of a man on the ground, a reporter, Aaron Mattei, and he speaks about it and gives us such a clear and concise explanation of the new weapons of mass destruction claims that were being used to justify the destruction of Syria. Could you roll that for us, please, Stephen?
I'm in Douma, Syria, not far from where the Douma deception was staged, one of the biggest pro-war deceptions since the Iraq War. This is where, in April 2018, dozens of bodies were filmed inside of a building. And the people who put out this video claimed that the victims had been subjected to a chemical weapons attack by the Syrian government. This led to airstrikes on Syria by the US, UK, and France. But now we know that the alleged Douma incident was staged. We know that because a hospital scene that was filmed here was confirmed by the people who were in the video and doctors to be a hoax put on by the White Helmets, which was a US, UK funded organization that worked very closely with the sectarian militias inside Syria, including the one that controlled this town called Jaish al-Islam. And we also know that Douma was staged because the world's top chemical weapons watchdog, the OPCW, came here and they conducted an investigation. And their investigation found no evidence of a chemical weapons attack, and they even found evidence that this incident was staged on the ground. But their findings were doctored and suppressed, and the world only got to hear about them because of a series of damning leaks, including the original report that team wrote, but that senior officials above them at the OPCW tried to censor and ultimately keep from the public. And now this cover-up continues, because even though this cover-up has become public, the same countries that bombed Syria and waged this dirty war, led by the US and UK, have fought the inspectors, refused to let them air their suppressed evidence. And so what this all means is that this pro-war cover-up continues to deny justice to the victims who were killed here, the dozens of people who were filmed dead inside Douma, not far from me. The cover-up is denying them justice, and until the inspectors are heard, until the OPCW cover-up can be addressed seriously, these people will be denied justice, and we will never know who really killed them, and the people who really killed them will continue to get away with it.
The reporter, Aaron Mattei, his focus there was on the victims, so the bodies that were laid out in the pretense of a chemical weapons attack to stage this. And he's really asking, who killed these people? Were these the victims of these Islamic extremists and that we were financing, that the West were financing to destabilize Syria and to destroy Syria? But Syria was not destroyed, because today it completed its election process, and we'll have the results of those elections soon, probably not before the end of this program. But those incidents were used to justify mass killings right across Syria, a war, a proxy war, and with so many participants who are and continue to steal the oil, to steal the resources of Syria, left, right and centre, like vultures around a corpse. But the Syrian people are still trying to maintain a normal, civilized life there. And they have pushed the Islamic extremists that are being financed by the West. They have pushed them out of most of their country, although the Americans seem to be bringing them back in to the east of Syria. And we do regularly report on that, and we'll continue to do so as well. So we're just asking everybody to check these things out yourself. Don't just go by what we are telling you. And when you do confirm what we are telling you, share it out there, please. On the matter of sharing, just if you've tuned in, we're not in the new normal studio tonight. We're having some technical work done in that studio, but we'll be back in the studio next week. In case you're wondering where has Finbar Markey's background gone. Could you share out the program now? Let's get some real news out there. It's very tough, especially when we're working from a base that we're not being financed or we're not being bought out by anybody. So it's very tough to try to get our news and what we're doing out there. So if you can give the show a like tonight, share it out right now, take that out that few seconds And that's your work done, or a bit of your work done, in terms of creating progressive change into the future. Thanks for doing that in advance. I'm going to pass you over to Anna Kavanagh, my co-host now. Anna was going to be speaking to Pat Geoghegan, and Pat is from the Cappagh Farmers Group down there in Limerick, and they have some very, very serious concerns. And Anna's just getting an update from Pat, but I think for new viewers, she'll give us a little bit of background as well in terms of what's happening down there. So I'll pass you over. Good evening, Anna. How are you?
Good evening, Finbar. And before we go any place, I just want to sort of take issue with you on the Belarusian story, the hijacking of the plane. And it just strikes me that the issue is not really so much the background of the individual. You say that he's a far-right Nazi, and that may well be the case, and that's a new perspective on the story. Perhaps we can't be certain that this is not a story that hasn't been put out, by the Russians or by the Belarusian government. But setting all that aside, leaving aside his background, whether he is Snow White or not, my big issue with that is the hijacking. It effectively was the hijacking of a plane. People boarded that Ryanair flight in good faith, believing that it was going to be a direct flight to Vilnius, I believe, in Lithuania. And then all of a sudden, it was redirected back to Belarus. So that would have been extremely frightening for anybody that would have been on board. I know that if I was on board, I would have been terrified. So I think the big issue there is it was really a hijacking of the plane by the Belarusian government. If this individual was of concern or of note to them, there surely could have been a better way to move in on him than to hijack the plane.
Well, they did what they did. My point is about the hypocrisy, Anna, and the lies. Yes. We've been presented that this guy is an angel, number one, which is not. Yes. He tried to destabilize Belarus. Number two, in terms of the hypocrisy of the fact that the West trying to arrest Edward Snowden did the very same kind of a thing with an aeroplane going across Austrian airspace only a few years ago. An aeroplane carrying the president, Evo Morales of Bolivia, in fact. And they kidnapped him and everybody else. There's no, and I'm not saying Belarus is an ideal country or anything, or the behavior was right, but we have to also name the other inaccuracies, the hypocrisies and the lies in that story as well. So I did say at the beginning that I'm not saying Belarus or Russia are in any way ideal. I'll be open here, I as a gay man would not get on well in either of those countries, but at the same time, when the wool is being pulled over our eyes, because ultimately this is a part of a bigger picture trying to create a military industrial complex. And that has to be named every time. But I do appreciate you coming in to make that point, because I don't want the viewer to think that I'm supportive of those activities. So thanks for that. And back over to you, Anna.
Okay. For almost 3 decades now, Cappagh farmers in County Limerick have been campaigning against an aluminium plant on the shores of the Shannon Estuary. And I'm joined now by Pat Geoghegan from Cappagh Farmers Group to tell us a little bit about the recent developments in the case. So you're very, very welcome.
Thanks, Anna. Appreciate it.
And I know, Pat, that I have spoken to you a number of times. Indeed, we spoke before Christmas on Centre Ground, and you gave us an update at that time on what was happening in Askeaton. So for our viewers, Pat, who are new to this story, maybe you might just enlighten them a little bit about what is actually happening on the Shannon Estuary.
Well, Anna, we have an environmental disaster on the Shannon Estuary. We have 450 acres of toxic waste stored just meters from the estuary. Now, there's about 50 million tons of toxic waste in that 450 acres. When the planning originally was granted in 1983, 150 acres was never lined. The planning looked for all that to be lined. So we have an environmental disaster since 1983 because the toxic waste is seeping into the Shannon, and no one has ever done.
We'll have a look now, actually, as you're speaking, Pat, because we have some aerial footage of what you're talking about. So maybe you might talk us through on this.
What you're looking at there, you're looking at two mud ponds. One is 250 acres in size, another one is 200 acres in size. As you see, there's only a wall, it's crushed stone that's keeping all this waste in those ponds. The first pond that's close to the plant itself has 150 acres of that never lined. Like, look, it's unreal what has been going on. Everyone has been turning a blind eye to it, but you have an environmental disaster. It's one of the biggest in Europe, and the state has been protecting this company since 1983. Like, if these banks burst, we're in serious trouble. And why there's a serious problem now at the moment is that just close to the mud pond one, near the plant itself, Aughinish Alumina, and it's owned by a Russian company, got planning for a borough pit. Now, a borough pit is the blasting of rock to about 25 feet. It's 4.5 hectares in size. They're going to, now this is how reckless it's gone. They're going to set off explosives just meters from the embankment that stores this toxic waste. As I said, it's only crushed rock that's there. They're going to be able to blast for 4 to 5 months in the year, for about 4 blasts every week. This is going to go on for 10 years. Like, it could be the first blast, or it could be the very last blast that will unearth an environmental disaster that once this red mud toxic waste gets into the Shannon, if the banks break, it'll be the end of the Shannon Estuary for decades to come. Like, this company has been able to get away with everything. And when you're able to get away with everything, you will take chances, and you will believe that you can still apply for planning on County Council. Limerick County Council will grant it no matter what. On Board Penala will look after that if we appeal it. And the EPA keeps giving them a review of their license so that they can carry on like that. So that is a huge thing at the moment. The review is before the EPA at the moment, and if we expect the EPA will more likely grant it. If they do, then they're going to go and blast. And what the blasting is for is to take out rock, crush it, and increase the embankment further so that they can store more toxic waste. So what the situation is, they're 32 meters above sea level in Mud Pond 1. They're about 25 meters above sea level in Mud Pond 2. And the higher they go up, now for your listeners, I'll explain to you how this waste ends up in these ponds. Now, the finished product is alumina. Now, this is a toxic waste. It goes out there in pipes, pumped out, and it's left to level off. Then when it levels off, it dries. Now, our farms, we have this red mud coming onto it. It's toxic waste. Like Mayo, Donegal, Tyrone, Galway, Roscommon, all those areas, they have this red dust up there, and the EPA are turning a blind eye. So I would ask listeners tonight, in the morning, please go out into your garden, and if you see anything that holds water, any containers, please have a look at it. If there's red in the bottom, there's a good chance that it came from these mud ponds in Askeaton. And like, this is reckless. They're open ponds. They're left to keep dumping this waste onto these ponds, and when it dries out, it just blows away. It's absolutely reckless what's been allowed to happen. But if you have the state and every agency protecting you, why should you worry? it's not going to be their problem. If the banks break, the taxpayer will pick up millions for it, and this company will be gone. So like it's serious, Anna. Like, we are at it for 20 years. People are not listening to us. Well, some people are, but the state are not listening to us, because this company is allowed to do what it wants to do. Like, and to us, people needs to know that it is an environmental disaster, one of the biggest of its kind, and it's happening down to us in Mesquite.
Well, I do know that there was an attempt by Cement Roadstone Holding recently, when they were applying to the EPA for a license to incinerate rubbish in their Limerick cement plant at Mungret, that there was a proposal to incinerate that red mud, but that was turned down by the EPA.
Well, it was turned down, but it was getting in under the radar until our group raised it. What they were going to do is to take red mud, move it into the cement factory and burn it as a waste inside there. Like, we have one Eskeaton, like, we had problems in the 90s. We had huge amount of animals dying, human health problems, and the state came in, they investigated, and they cleared this industry of any wrongdoing. 27 farmers in the area, they were all blamed for damaging their own animals. Like, it's only Ireland who get away with this, like, So that moved on then, and we had human health problems. We have cancer clusters. No one wants to investigate them. We have Alzheimer's, respiratory problem now, and since the COVID came in, a lot of people are at home. They go for their walks, and they're out there. Their faces are being burned from the substance in the air. Their throats are being burned. They have respiratory problems. They have fatigue, and the list is endless. And like, it's not right. We want clean air to breathe. We don't want to shut any factory down. We just want clean air, but we're not getting clean air. And we notice that even on our own farm now, when we're out there looking at the animals, all of a sudden you're walking through the fields and you have to stop. Why? Because you have no air to breathe. Your oxygen is cut off. You start getting a burning pain in your chest. You think you're going to get a heart attack. And the thing is, you start throwing up, because the chemicals are coming into our system. They're reacting to it, and you get a serious reaction. Like, my wife, my daughter, and myself, 3 of us were sick, throwing up only just a week ago when the emissions came. Like, this is how serious it is for people. People are breathing this in, and there is no one saying no. Pull back. Like, production needs to be pulled back, and we believe we can show why this has happened. It happened in 2018. Is that there were sanctions put on the Russian company Rusal by the US government. Them sanctions were lifted in 2019. This was all thanks to our Taoiseach at the time, Leo Varadkar, 4 or 5 of his ministers, all over doing the work for this Russian owner. They were giving the impression that jobs were going to be lost in the Shannon Estuary. That was not going to be the case, because this company needs to be in Eskeaton, needs to be in Europe for the European market. Like, this Russian used the Irish government like puppets, which they are, but Varadkar didn't think what was going to be the consequences to the families in the area. And what happened in January 2019 is that this company, once the sanctions got lifted, they immediately went back into production. They opened up the throttle so quick, they put their foot to the pedal, and the emissions came out in such huge amounts that we have consequences of human health problems following that. We also have our animal problems back, infertility in animals, respiratory problems, and the whole lot. But the government at the time, and Fianna Fáil were involved, they did not care about the humans, when all of a sudden they would jump up in production and push the production to a high level, is that the people's system were not able to deal with it. And this is why we're seeing now human health problems again to the fore, animal problems to the fore, and it's thanks to our government. Look after these big industry, the owners who only pay 5,000 in corporation and corporate tax and the whole lot. Look, we're just sick of it, Anna. No one gives a fiddlers, no one cares about human health. We mean nothing to these people. It's profits, profits, profits. And we are in a serious trouble, and anyone out there that can help us, we will take that help.
Okay, just before you go, Pat, and I'd like to remind our viewers, or to tell our viewers, that back in the 1990s, when all the animals were dying in the field, and this was exposed by RTE, the EPA were brought in to carry out an investigation into why all the animals were dying. And as part of that investigation, the Geoghegan family gave blood samples and so on. And the amazing thing about it was that these blood samples went missing. So just very, very briefly, Pat, just run us through that, how your family's blood samples went missing, and kind of just, I suppose, for libel and defamation purposes, we can't name names.
Right, that's no problem, Anna. Well, the samples we had given in was in the investigation at the time. It was a human health investigation, and there were evidence at the time of who was polluting us. We were aware of who was polluting us, and we gave evidence. We gave evidence in blood samples from our family, urine samples, hair samples, nasal swab, and you name it, anything that we could give after a pollution incident, we gave it to them. Now, them samples were being tested against the emissions from this industry. And we, after a year and a half or so, we were told that suddenly all those samples went missing. The samples were supposed to have been lost in the laboratory, moving from one to the other. They were lost when they were sent away in the post for testing. Like the absolute, like how they got away with it is just unbelievable. But the problem was, one doctor had given evidence to an internal inquiry team at the time, who said that his discussion with the pathologist at the time has said that in fact the samples that were sent away were tested and results were back, and others were waiting. This was the time when this industry was just waiting to get an IPC license and waiting to be cleared of a state investigation for not causing the problems in Askeaton. Those samples went missing. Not alone the samples, but the results that came back were gone. And soon afterwards, this industry was able to be granted a license. At the time, the company at the time had employed Frank Dunlop as well to get this license and to be cleared of any wrongdoing, and also in the state investigation. So there was going to be no connection whatsoever to the industry as being the fault of anything here. So that is the time. At that time, the minister at the time was Micheál Martin, and we had met with Micheál Martin, and Micheál Martin was aware that these tests were carried out and results were back, and suddenly he was going to call a 3-panel person to look into it, and suddenly that went by the wayside, and Micheál Martin stopped any inquiry happening. He got advice at the time from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, and that man has gone up further the ladder since. And since then, Leo Varadkar, when he came as Minister for Health, he has protected the officials that were involved, and the same with Simon Harris. And now our latest Minister for Health, Stephen Donnelly, is up to his eyes again in trying to keep the lid on this. They've been keeping the lid on it for 20 years now because of the consequences. They stopped our inquiry, which was going to open up a 5.3 million state investigation as to what happened to the farmers and all there. One section of this, if it fell, all of it was going to fall. So they're 20 years hard at it, and we're 20 years hard at it too, and we're not giving up until we bring those people responsible for allowing our results and what happened to our family to the fore. They have covered up, they keep covering up, and the problem is those who covered up 20 years ago are still in a position now to keep the lid on it. But we're not going to stop, and it's thanks to you, Anna, that has been highlighting this for 15 years for us.
Well, Pat, I want to commend you and Nuala and Cappagh Farmers. I know that it is a very, very, very difficult struggle for you and a difficult fight. But as you say, you're not giving up, Pat, and that's very, very commendable. And as you're speaking, I always compare you to Erin Brockovich. She, battled for many, many years for justice on an environmental issue and was victorious in the end. And I know that you and Cappagh Farmers will one day be victorious in this fight. I just hope and pray, Pat, that it doesn't take a massive environmental disaster on the Shannon Estuary for justice to come. We can't allow that to happen, because not alone is the Shannon Estuary at stake. If those walls, those retaining walls, give way when they start to blast, and that stuff starts to seep out into the Shannon Estuary, it's going to be washed up the entire west coast of Ireland, wiping out our fishing industry, wiping out our tourist industry, and it just doesn't bear thinking about. So I just want to thank you, Pat, for coming on tonight, and wish you and Nuala and all the family and all the Cappagh farmers the very, very best, and may you continue to have the courage to keep up the good fight, because it's a fight not just for yourself, it's and your family, it's a fight for all of the people of Ireland. And it's about time the people of Ireland started to wake up to what is actually happening in this country.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we leave it at that, and thank you. Thank you so much, Pat.
Okay, bye now.
That was Pat Geoghegan from the Cappagh Farmers Group. It's just keeping a lid on it, trying to bury things in the sand, standing on people and silencing people. They seem to be themes with regards to the guests that we have on this show and any campaigns that we feature on this show. People tell us the same pattern of events. Pat there has been talking about campaigning for 15, 20 years on that issue. We're about to be joined by Antoinette Keegan from the Stardust Justice campaign, who has been campaigning essentially for most of her life at this stage, for 40 years, as was her mother and father before her, seeking an inquest into what really happened in the Stardust disaster, in which Antoinette herself was in the disaster and escaped with her life but lost 2 sisters. But Antoinette has some good news for once in relation to our chat on the show, in that the government, there's been a recent campaign, so it seems to be stages of campaign that the Stardust families have had to go through, and the latest stage of campaigning is to try to get their families, their legal costs at the inquest covered. And this in itself was another big battle that these poor families were put through. This week, I won't tell you the whole story. I'll let Antoinette do that herself. But this week there was some positive news on that front. Can you hear me, Antoinette? Antoinette is just sorting out her mute at the moment. So Antoinette, whenever you can hear us, just speak out loudly. Yeah, I can hear you now, Antoinette. I can hear you now. Can you hear me, Antoinette? Antoinette, can you hear me? I can hear you. Antoinette, can you hear me? Antoinette, can you hear me? Okay, well, I'll tell you what happened in the Dáil anyway while we're trying to get Antoinette through. So, Marilyn McDonald, leader of the Sinn Féin party, asked Micheál Martin in the Dáil, has asked over the last couple of weeks, in fact, questions in relation to the Stardust financing the legal aspect of the inquest for the families, because everybody else involved, from the fire station to local authorities, everybody else was having their legal costs covered, but not the Stardust family. So they've been campaigning over the last few weeks for that, and it was announced in the Dáil that issue in which inquests, legal aid did not cover inquests, was actually finally sorted out, because it wasn't a legislative issue, it was more of an administrative issue. Though again, it just showed another big stress and another big battle that the families had to go through after 40 years of battling to try to get some justice. Can you hear me, Antoinette? Okay, well, Antoinette is not there. We're going to try to bring her in anyway. But in the meantime, we're going to turn back over to Anna Kavanagh, and she's going to cover her news and views on some of the stories that were not really discussed in the media this week. Are you there, Anna? Please say you're there, Anna. Please say you're there.
Yes, I am here, Finbar.
Ariana, come here, just to commend you on that interview with Pat Geoghegan. It's just so disappointing, everything about this country at times. I know we should try to stay uplifted, but when you hear about things like that, which they're just no-brainers, they need to get sorted out, and they're just walking us into another disaster.
Now, I think Antoinette has actually joined us. Okay. Now, I can't see myself. Can you just share the screen with me, please, Stephen? No, I have a... Yes, now I see myself.
We have Antoinette back there, have we? Yeah. Sorry about this, folks. This is what live television does sometimes. When you're bringing the real raw news and you're going into the homes of the people who are right in the middle of their stories, the real people, and not the politicians and things like that, sometimes you get these kind of glitches. Can you hear me, Antoinette? We're nearly there, folks. It's just, I'd love Antoinette to be able to give you a positive news story here tonight.
Yeah.
So
Hear me now?
I can hear you now, Antoinette. Hello, sorry about that. How are you, Antoinette?
I'm grand. The spirits is playing with my phone, something terrible. It's not even ringing anymore.
Oh, well, listen, while the going's good, we'll get through this interview. How's that? Can you hear me, Antoinette?
She's muted again.
Okay, do you want to try that one more time, Antoinette? Please God, fingers crossed we'll get it this time. And if not, we'll just move on to our next segment. Can you hear us, Antoinette? Oh, you're gone again.
I wonder why is her microphone muting?
I'll tell you what, we'll try to come back to Antoinette at the end of the show, and if not, next week. But in the meantime, Anna, if you want to give us those news and views.
Okay. You're very welcome to this week's news and views, where I try to join up the dots regarding the headlines for the week to give you a bigger picture of what is actually happening in the country. And tonight I'm going to take a look at the type of future that we are creating for our children. And first up, a woman with mental health issues on remand in prison awaiting trial will have her baby forcefully delivered against her will by caesarean section. Mr. Justice Michael Quinn granted a High Court order to the HSE to carry out the caesarean by force if necessary. TUSLA has been notified and is on standby, and this High Court order was granted on Monday. TUSLA will probably now apply for and get a court order to take the baby from the mother as soon as it's born. And this begs the question, is there a more humane way of dealing with troubled people in the 21st century? And speaking of children, Children's Ombudsman Niall Muldoon met with children on a Cork halting site and published a report on Monday on the plight of these children. And we're going to look now at a video of what the children had to say to the Children's Ombudsman when they met him.
There's no hating in the trailers and you have to go outside to go toilet.
We had no swings and nothing to play with.
We only play on puddles.
When you want to wash your clothes, you have to wash them in a basin and then hang them up, but they never get dry with the cold.
It's all mud and all, and then you fall and cut ourselves all the time.
People ask why I'm dirty, but I'd be ashamed to say.
Sometimes the electric goes off, and then it's black.
We have no space.
This is hell.
It's like we're forgotten.
Niall Muldoon's report documents failure after failure by Cork County Council to improve living conditions for the traveller families living on this halting site that they have rented from the council. It documents a failure to consider the interests of the children living there and the persistent failure to address illegal dumping on the site and its failure to address serious overcrowding. There was also carelessness in relation to housing applications and record keeping. Kitty Holland, the social affairs correspondent with the Irish Times, who's a tireless campaigner for human rights, reported in yesterday's Irish Times that, for the record, Spring Lane in Cork is not the worst traveller site that she has visited. And I quote her, she says, "Up and down the country, I have met parents of beautiful, bright, sparkling with potential children doing their level best in the most crushing of circumstances," she said. Data published in 2019 by the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government shows that 14 local authorities drew down zero funding that was available to them from the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government for traveller accommodation. Across all local authorities, there was less than half the money spent by these local authorities on traveller accommodation that was available to them from government. And without going into the reasons for the housing crisis that's now facing the country, let's just focus on the impact that the housing crisis is having on our children. Rory Hearn is Assistant Professor of Social Policy in the Department of Applied Social Studies in Maynooth University, and he's the author of Housing Shock, the Irish Housing Crisis and How to Solve It. And Rory Hearn spoke on Tuesday morning on TVAM, and we'll have a look now at what he had to say.
Social catastrophe. People are going to emigrate, I think, and it's devastating for our country. We've seen the devastating impact of that before on families. I'm very worried about what's going to happen in the coming months and years. I think the generation rent and all those who are affected are speaking up. I think they have to speak up. I hope you don't leave. My advice would be to actually take action on this, to say we're not accepting this. We want a housing system that provides people's homes. We want our children to be able to live and get affordable homes, to live near us, to be able to live near us. Sorry. It's deeply personal for me, in that, you know, I have children, young children, and I'm worried, you know, will they be able to get a home in Ireland? Will they be able to get an affordable home? I want them to live nearer to me. I want them to live in this country. I don't think the measures that the government have introduced are going to make any difference whatsoever.
Where there's a will, there's a way. In the depths of a recession in the 1970s, the Fine Gael Labour government built 100,000 houses between 1973 and 1977. That's just in 4 years. And the scandal today is that the government is giving billions to private developers and to landlords to provide social houses that the state and the tenants will never own. And an even deeper look at the future that we're creating for our children. US tech giant Microsoft has been given the go-ahead by South Dublin County Council to build 2 giant data centres and a landmark office development at Dublin's Grange Castle Business Park. And we're going to have a look now at Deputy Breed Smith, who raised the issue of the uncontrolled building of data centres in Ireland, and she raised this issue in the Dáil back on the 10th of March.
I think people should be aware that there's an astonishing growth in the number of data centres across the state. We currently have about 54, mostly based around Dublin. There are another 10 under construction, and planning permission has already been granted for about 31 extra. Now that means that although the argument the government make is that they will have their own renewable energy, you're also going to see by 2030 half of the total renewables produced in this country being gobbled up by data centres. In anybody's book, that doesn't make ecological, sustainable or environmental sense. And there's also the question of water, because we can't regenerate water, but these data centres use a vast quantity of water, and we know how much of the question of water as a public resource has been at the heart of politics in this country. So I think, Minister, you should, in the first instance, begin to look at the planning legislation which allows data centres a special place as part of strategic infrastructure, which fast-tracks planning permission for them. This is getting out of control.
Thank you, Deputy.
Deputy Breed Smith there raising concerns about the future of our environment. The Environmental Pollution Agency has given Irish Cement the go-ahead to burn 1 million tyres a year in their Mungret plant, located in a residential area a short distance from the centre of Limerick City. A further 80,000 tonnes of waste from industry, slaughterhouses, sewage treatment plants and household and commercial rubbish collections will also be permitted to be burned. Now, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency is Laura Burke, who has been a director there since 2004. And it's interesting to note that before she went to work for the EPA in 2004, she worked as a project manager with Endeavour Ireland. Now, Endeavour Ireland is the subsidiary of a Belgian multinational, and it was granted a licence by the EPA in 2008 to operate the country's first incinerator at Dooley near Drogheda in County Meath, despite fierce resistance from locals. Moving on, yesterday in the Dáil, Deputy Paul Murphy raised the plight of young people in relation to the Gardaí. He said, and I quote, "The Gardaí has repeatedly refused to provide a breakdown of fines and arrests by ethnicity, despite repeated requests from the policing authority and despite promising to provide that information." And this is where the theme of our young people comes in. He says that the evidence already exists and it is in the public domain that the Gardaí have applied its powers in a discriminatory way. Young people, for example, have been disproportionately targeted. He went on to say some 77% of fines have been imposed on people under the age of 35, compared to 1% on those aged over 65. And he says, and I quote, incredibly close to half of all COVID-related fines in Dublin have been handed out in just 2 of its 18 Garda districts, namely Ballymun and Blanchardstown. Deputy Murphy was speaking in the Dáil debate yesterday ahead of the government's decision to extend COVID-19 emergency powers to Minister Donnelly, who will be able to introduce laws until next spring without having to consult with the Dáil. And we're going to have a listen now to Deputy Matty McGrath and his contribution to that debate.
Anybody that spoke out, whether they were doctors, consultants or whatever, were banished, sacked, unceremoniously dismissed, the best of people. Dr. Horan has been challenged by groups of doctors to debate, in private, refused point blank to meet him. When I asked them in the last meeting that I was in government buildings, in the Taoiseach's office, what was the science behind the churches being closed, when I was very concerned that we see what happened to Father Hughes and the Protestant clergymen and many other people, and he wouldn't answer me. The third time I asked him, the Taoiseach asked him to reply to me. I think you were there, Minister. You were there. And he said, Deputy McGrath, he said, we're dealing with a pandemic. We do the lockdown and we do the science later. What arrogance. What arrogance, the public representative, for anybody else. Do the science later. There's absolutely no science. Been a con job from the start. No science, because you wouldn't listen to any debate. RT, all the media, mainstream media, they were bought out. They have 5 million better off now than they were when it started. All the local radios, including my own, the country got massive money, the papers. No contrarian view. That's a very dangerous thing. I'm glad now that more of the opposition have joined us and going to vote against these measures. It's a very dangerous for democracy. Very dangerous, because if you haven't proper discourse and debate, you will have nothing. And then, as I said, it's still going on, because you knew since March that this just renewing or extending the sunset clause wasn't going to do, and you kept it from us. And there's no legal scrutiny for this bill, as I said earlier today. And you introduced through the bill, a sneaky, through the Senate, a sneaky way, because legislation introduced in the Senate last Count Cora cannot be have legal pre-legislative scrutiny. So none. So it's a three-card trick all the time. But just people are wise to what's going on. And the people are very wise to it. So we have no pre-legislative scrutiny in any of these 4 pieces of legislation that we're voting on here this week and debate. None. The Health Committee could have dealt with it if they had got it, and they should have got it. You knew since March. This crack all the time was, oh, we haven't time. It's an emergency. It's urgent.
Yes, Deputy, you've been watching Deputy Matty McGrath speaking in the Dáil yesterday in the debate on the government's decision to extend the emergency powers until the spring of 2022. And it's interesting there how he spoke about the CMO, Tony Holohan, saying that they would deal with the science later. In the last week, a lady in Cork was actually jailed over mask wearing, the non-wearing of a mask, and she was issued with a very hefty fine then on Monday. We'll have a listen now to what Tony Holohan had to say in April 2020 about masks.
We follow the advice of the WHO. We do not recommend masks for general use in the public for the reasons we've stated before. We think there are potential risks and unintended consequences, and that it may lead to a false sense of security and a lack of maybe compliance potentially with some of the other important behaviours like hand washing and social distancing and so on.
So now we have a situation where the CMO last year was saying that he didn't recommend mask wearing. And within the last week, we've had a lady jailed over the non-wearing of a mask. And I just asked the question, are we slowly moving towards a police state? And of course, there has been huge criticism of mainstream media for its failure in the last year to rail against the prevailing narrative and to challenge what is being said. But we have to commend the few journalists who have actually had the courage to challenge what is actually taking place. And one of those is Sarah Carey. She's a journalist with the Irish Independent, and we'll have a look now at her questioning the CMO about antigen and PCR tests.
And then, so when we're comparing then these antigen tests, testing positive with the PCR tests, does that include PCR tests that have tested positive even though we know that they're no longer infectious? So you know that curve that people have seen where there's an infectious period, say of 4 days, and you're still testing positive on PCR. I just want to be clear that we're being fair in what we compare with on what is a positive test. You know, so PCR positive does not mean infectious necessarily.
Necessarily?
Yeah.
What's your point?
So
you said what your understanding.
I want to be.
What's your understanding of that? Because we can correct your understanding, because it doesn't seem to me to be correct. But if you set it out,
what I want to
what's
be.
Your understanding
what I want to be sure
test?
is that we're fairly comparing an antigen test with a PCR test.
And we are.
So
we're sure of that.
Okay, so so when you're saying PCR test positive, you're taking into account the fact that people might test positive but aren't necessarily infectious.
We take all of that into account.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting there, the CMO saying that he takes into account that people who test positive using a PCR test may not necessarily be infectious. Very interesting, because PCR testing is effectively what has kept the country locked down for the last year. A study across 7 countries published in the prestigious medical journal The Lancet estimates that fewer than 2 out of every 1 million children died with COVID during the pandemic, which is a much lower rate than the fatality rate for children when there is a flu epidemic. Data coming from the Central Statistics Office shows that fewer people died in 2020 in Ireland than in the previous 5 years. And mainstream media is keeping a very tight lid on this information. Graham Neary, a data analyst, tweeted during the week, "I publish these every month when I get them. For a long time now, they have proven that the COVID numbers reported by government and media are fraudulent. But the fraud continues." And so I want to thank you very much for viewing, and I have a small request. Can you please share this video so that we can get this news out to a much wider audience? And as always, I like to leave you with a question to ponder for the coming days. And my question this evening is this: do we want to be the first generation of Irish adults to create atrocious living conditions for our children?
That's Antoinette. That's Anna Kavanagh asking the brave questions that most people won't ask. And those that do ask are often labelled, unpleasant labels for asking. What was interesting about the video footage you showed, Anna, in relation to Dr. Houlihan and the statement in early 2020 that masks had potential negative impacts in themselves. At the same time, Dr. Fauci in the United States was saying the same things. And later on in the year, he admitted that he had lied to the public, and he had only said that about the masks because they didn't want all the medical staff not having masks because the public were buying them. So he admitted at the time that he was lying in the public interest as he saw it. And I think that's been happening a long time throughout the entire pandemic, that when people perceive that they can give a misfact or a misinterpretation of a fact in what they see as the public interest, could be other people's interest too, they think it's okay to do that. But the real worry is that when that transcends into other areas of life, so is it okay to tell lies about everything? If you, as a senior member of government, or if you as a senior scientist, or whatever the case might be, if you think it's in the public interest for them not to know X, Y, or Z. It's okay to knowingly tell lies about it. So I think it was great to see the parallel between what Fauci was saying in the United States and what Holohan was saying here along at the same time. It's been a really busy show. It's been a long show from the point of view of getting it prepared over the last week, Anna. Lots of ups and downs, but we did get it out. Just to remind people who may be coming in, I'm not in the usual studio this week, but I will be next week. Have we got Antoinette Keegan there? Antoinette, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah. Yeah.
Got the best for last. Hallelujah. How are you, Antoinette? We were trying to get Antoinette in earlier if you've just joined us. Antoinette's from the Stardust family campaign seeking justice. Antoinette herself escaped the fire with her life, but unfortunately lost 2 sisters. Her family have campaigned for an inquiry over the last 40 years. They've been constantly been put through battle after battle. The latest one is that the families were not being given the funding for their legal participation in the upcoming inquest. And so Antoinette and our colleagues and our friends have had to go into a battle to try to get funding. But there's some positive news, Antoinette. Do you want to fill us in?
I do, yeah. We actually got the... Hello?
Hello, I can hear you. Yeah, go on ahead.
Yeah, no, we actually got the funding for the legal aid resolved. That was resolved last week, and families have received the forms from the legal aid. They have to sign them on the yellow sheet that they get and send them back to our solicitor, Dara Mackin of Phoenix Law. So that's all been resolved, but that was a long battle that we had to stand and continue to do.
And just another battle, wasn't it, on top of more and more and more. No matter when you think you're there, there's another issue.
Yeah, we keep getting stonewalled one thing after the other. Like when we got the inquest approved by the Attorney General in 2018, we thought we were on our way. Now this is 2021, and literally we're still stuck in a limbo situation. But this is going to be a long inquest. It's going to be very difficult for families that lost their loved ones. It's going to be heartbreaking to listen to how they died and everything else and what happened to them.
Yeah.
But literally, we are being as strong as we can be, insofar as that we've waited this length of time, and my mother, Christine Keegan, was instrumental in getting it. She never gave up. Like my father, John Keegan, never gave up. And my whole family now have come on board, and they're all there, and they're 100% behind this campaign.
Yeah. Have you been talking to Maris and Phyllis McHugh since you got the good news?
I have, yeah. They were delighted, and insofar as RT is doing a program as well, and they actually went off to do their documentary last week, as did other families that lost loved ones as well.
Yeah.
And they had to relive the whole trauma of it.
Yeah.
But it's just going to be very difficult for all the families.
Yeah. I know that the first time you appeared on the show, you've been on about 4 times now. The first time you appeared, you told us about what happened that night, and I could see that you were reliving it while you were telling it. I would never ask you to do that again, but I could see how much, even after 40 years, how that's very much still with you.
Yeah, and it is. It's very difficult, and it's something that will never leave you. It's like it only happened yesterday. It's gone. You wake up, it's breakfast, dinner, tea. You consume it, and you just can't ever forget it. It's just one nightmare that you thought was not a dream, or nightmare. Right? It was a bad dream you had. You wake up and your family is there, your sisters is there, your mom and dad's there, and this never happened, but it did happen. And in actual fact, we're going to get there. We are going to get there, and we just want to thank all the public for all their support. We want to thank yourself, right, for everything you've done, right, on the show and the media. because without all the media and the public, we wouldn't be this far.
Yeah.
And also Lynn Boylan and Mary Lou MacDonald, because she raised the question last week, Sinn Féin, and she brought it to light, and Taoiseach had to respond. Like, the Taoiseach has been ignoring emails from me. He's been ignoring the situation as it has been. Like, this inquest was set up, and it should have started last January, but because of COVID-19, it didn't. Now, it's all realistic. Like, we can't see it happening until possibly the autumn. But we are willing to, like, you know, wait, because we want it done properly, and we're not going to start pushing things. Like, everything has to be put into perspective of the recovery of documents, and our solicitor has to make sure that he has everything that he needs. Darren Mackin is an excellent solicitor, and so he's a great team on board as well to help us.
But hold on, Antoinette, have you and your family, because I know that your mother and father, before you drove this campaign over the 40 years, have you and your family been paying all of this stuff yourselves, the legal stuff, up until now? And are you going to get that back? Like, okay, so there's an acceptance that there should have been an inquest now. You guys have spent a fortune. Are you going to get any of that back, or what's happening there?
Well, I know for one thing, right, my father spent a fortune out of his own pocket. Like, back in 1985, right, he set up his own committee, right, the Stardust Victims Committee. That would never happen because my father has passed away, so that debt goes with my father. And the same applies to my mother. That debt goes with her. But there is historical costs here that have accrued since 2008, and some of them are for, like, experts that was involved, and also, like, historical costs, right, for the expenditure that was incurred insofar as the administration office. Pat McCartan did say to me at a meeting that I had with him, when I told him that I was owed money, personally owed money on it, and so was, like, other families, etc. And he said, like, this will only happen if there's a new inquiry. But Pat McCartan did state, right, that if something new develops, that the money has to be paid. Yeah. And in fact, Paul Murphy raised it in the Dáil on the 20th of October 2020 to the Minister of Justice, Helen McEntee. And her response to Deputy Murphy was in relation to the claims for the historical costs referred by the Deputy. The Chief State Solicitor's Office, that's the CSSO, have been engaged previously and continue to act on behalf of my department in an effort to resolve this matter. However, such efforts have not been successful to date. That's a total lie, because our solicitor, Darren Mackin, has been writing to the Chief State Solicitor's Office and also to the Department of Justice, and there's no actual correspondence being received back. Okay. And then Helen McEntee personally wrote me a letter, and on the letter it states, right, the Chief State Solicitor's Office remains engaged on behalf of this department to consult with your legal representatives if you wish to once more seek to resolve the matter of historical cost claims. In this regard, I wish to advise that all correspondence in relation to this matter should be directed to the CSSO by your legal advisors, and that was stated on the 14th of October 2020. But still to this day, right, they won't correspond to our solicitor. They're not answering them back, and there has been no engagement and no resolution to the historical costs.
Right, okay. And your family these are working class families who were leaving themselves short on everything to pay to try to drive this campaign for an inquest, and it has been justified now. The inquest is happening.
That's correct. Now, the other thing I want to make note on, right, that your listeners listen to this very carefully. We had a legal team on our side, right, back in 2008, when the independent external examination took place with the senior counsel, Paul Coffey. And when I got the freedom of information of the money that was paid out from the state and who got money, and it came back to me like that our legal team got €424,300. And the person that done the independent inquiry, he got €425,375. He got all that for himself. But when it came to our side had to pay for 2 senior counsels, 1 junior counsel, an electrical engineer, a fire consultant, a fire engineer, and other pathologists. There was at least 13 different people, experts on our side, and all that money that we got from the legal, from the Department of Justice, for our team, that had to be divided between all them people. And then when the final amount was put in, which was agreed by the state at 200,000, the senior counsel that done the independent examination made a point of stating, that because there was a physical apocalypse, like a recession, that he thinks, it'd be acceptable for us families and our solicitor to accept 20,000 because there's a recession. But he didn't see fit for himself to undercut himself. He actually got
425
more than our legal team did.
Yeah, that's just amazing in itself, and it's typical of Ireland. We're way above our time, Antoinette.
Finbar.
Yes, Anna.
Can I come in here?
Yeah, of course.
And if Pat is listening, Pat, if you could unmute your button there, please. As I'm watching this, it has become so obvious to me what appears to be 2 unrelated guests tonight, Pat and Antoinette. In actual fact, sitting here now, it is so obvious that there is a very, very strong team running. It is the stonewalling of the Irish state when it comes to the administration of justice. Pat has spent 30 years, Pat and his wife Nuala and the Cappagh Farmers have spent 30 years campaigning for justice. Antoinette and her family have been involved in a 40-year campaign to get justice, and neither side has got justice. So if we could just bring in Pat and Antoinette, as it were, kind of, together, just if you want to say a word to each other.
Yeah, well, I like to say to Antoinette is that I'm very sorry for what all your family has gone through, and the pain and hurt that you've had to live with. And we know what the state are capable of, and you still have a long road to go, because the people that are in charge will never want the truth to come out. And unless the people of Ireland will come together and take the system on, we're all in trouble for a long, long time.
Okay, and Antoinette, would you like to say something there? Did you manage to hear Pat's story, Antoinette?
I did, yeah. No, I want to say thanks very much, Pat.
Yes.
No, I appreciate what Pat had to say, and what yourself said as well, Anna, in respect to the years of campaign, from my family's perspective, it has been 40 years, and again with Pat as well, he's 20 years, or 20 years. It's just unbelievable. I don't even call the Department of Justice anymore. I call them the Department of Injustice. And I've called them that for a long, long time, because they've done everything to stampede what we've given them, and they've stonewalled us, and they've done everything in their power, that we would never get anywhere. And in respect to the inquest, the only reason why we got it was because we had a great solicitor on board, Aaron Mackin, and he said, look, we're not going to go for any more inquiries, because all the inquiries that we've gotten over the years since 1981 up to now, or up to 2017, which was the last one, Pat McCartan's, they were all whitewashes, cover-ups and brown envelopes to hide the truth. And that's what I firmly believe. and it's not happening anymore. We're going to get
When you have an inquiry, you can't then, my understanding, it's very difficult to criminally prosecute somebody if there's been an inquiry on their actions, because it's said that it's already been brought out to the public light, so they wouldn't get a fair trial. So quite often inquiries are done, I think, to ensure that people will get away without being criminally prosecuted as well. So there's two types of cover-up happening with inquiries at the same time. I don't know if anybody would agree with that.
Yeah, can I come in there, Finbar? Another theme that came up there very, very strongly, Antoinette mentioned that Micheál Martin ignored all of her emails and stonewalled her and blocked the inquest, and that has also been the case with Pat Geoghegan. Micheál Martin failed to accede to Pat and Nuala's request for an inquiry into the missing blood samples. So we're dealing with a small cohort of people that have been there for decades that are keeping a lid on the truth.
Yeah. Well, listen, what we're going to have to do, folks, we're so way over time. Antoinette, we're going to keep on following this inquiry. Thank God it's happening. But I think you know more than anybody else, if you don't keep a close eye on them, they'll start diverting left, right and centre again. Thanks a million for coming on the show. Pat, please God, you're going to get what you're looking for soon, and that this potential future disaster is going to be nipped in the bud before. It sounds like it's already happening from the point of view this stuff is in the air, that is in the water, things like that. So we're going to have you back on the show if you're willing to come back on as well.
Yeah,
and I thank you for coming on tonight. We're way over time. I want to thank Stephen Kerr and Danny in our Dublin studio, Antoinette, Anna Kavanagh, and so my friend for allowing me to use his place because our studio wasn't up to scratch this week. We'll be back in the normal studio next week. Thanks for tuning in. Tune in next Thursday for Double Down on the Irish Inquiry at 9 p.m. Have a safe and a happy week, folks.